Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to do something a little different. Usually we look at the world around us, right? Like markets, technologies, big cultural shifts.
Right.
But today, I want to turn the lens inward. I want to look at your desk. I want to look at your inbox. And I want to ask a question that, frankly, it might actually keep you up at night once we're done here.
Yeah, it's a question that seems incredibly simple on the surface, but the moment you scratch that surface, you realize you're basically standing on quicksand.
Exactly. The question is this: who actually makes the decisions in your organization? And I don't mean who signs the paperwork. I don't mean who has the, senior vice president title on their LinkedIn profile. I mean, where does the actual choice happen? Is it the person with the title, or is it the system that prepared the options for them?
It sounds almost like a conspiracy theory when you put it that way.
Yeah, a little bit.
But the research we have today, the stack of sources we're going through, suggests it's actually just a structural reality of the modern workplace. The argument is that decision-making authority is migrating.
Migrating.
Right. It is moving away from people and into the infrastructure we use to do our jobs.
And specifically, we're talking about artificial intelligence here. But, and I really need to stress this right at the top for everyone listening, we are not talking about the sci-fi version of AI.
No, definitely not.
We aren't talking about ChatGPT writing sonnets or, I don't know, robots taking over an assembly line in some dramatic fashion.
Right. We're talking about something much more subtle and honestly much more pervasive. We're talking about the sources call it the just a tool trap.
Yes. I feel like I hear this every single day. I go to conferences, I sit in meetings, and whenever the topic of AI comes up, someone inevitably raises their hands and says, look, everyone calm down. AI is just a tool. They say it's like a hammer. It's like a spreadsheet. It's just there to help us.
It is the ultimate comfort blanket for executives.
It really is.
It's a way of saying, I am still in control. I am the craftsman, and this is just the object I hold in my hand. But the core thesis of the material we're diving into today is that this metaphor is completely broken.
Because it's not a hammer.
Exactly. AI is not a tool like a hammer. A hammer doesn't have an opinion. A hammer doesn't suggest where you should hit. A hammer doesn't hide the nails it thinks you shouldn't hit.
Right. The sources actually use a totally different word. They don't call it a tool at all. They call it a decision system. Or, even more interestingly, they call it infrastructure.
And that word infrastructure is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. When you think of infrastructure, you usually think of physical things, right? Bridges, roads, fiber optic cables.
Pure lines. That's stuff that just runs in the background.
Right. But think about what infrastructure actually does. Let's take the road system. A road doesn't scream orders at you. It doesn't tell you, hey, you must go to the grocery store.
Right.
But if there is no road leading to the grocery store, or if the road is a one-way street going in the opposite direction, the system has effectively decided for you that you aren't going there.
It constrains the possibility.
Exactly. It defines what is possible and what is permissible long before you ever make a conscious choice to turn the steering wheel. That is invisible governance. And the argument here is that AI is the new infrastructure of the knowledge economy.
It dictates the flows of information.
Yes. The range of options, the speed of execution, everything.
So the mission for this deep dive is to really trace those invisible lines. We want to unpack how adopting this kind of infrastructure initiates a structural shift in authority. Because if the road determines where I can drive, well, the road builder is the one actually in charge, not the driver.
Precisely. We are seeing a massive migration of power from the driver, meaning the manager or the executive, to the road builder, the system designer, the data scientist, the algorithm itself.
This is a bit mind-bending, so let's try to ground it. The sources make a really important point early on. This isn't the first time this has happened. We have seen this movie before. There is a whole history to this invisible governance.
The research refers to this as the authority migration model. And I love this framework because it stops us from thinking of history as just, a bunch of random events. It shows us there's a mechanism at play, a causal chain.
Walk us through that chain. How does authority actually move?
It starts with access. You invent a new technology, a new piece of infrastructure that expands access to something. That could be information, travel, goods, whatever. But when you expand access, you get volume, you get complexity.
You get chaos.
Exactly. Too many people, too many books, too much data. So to manage the chaos, you have to move to step 2, which is standardization.
You have to create rules.
Right. You have to create rules. You have to create formats. You can't have everyone just doing their own thing,
Oh.
or the whole system collapses.
Okay, that makes sense.
But standardization naturally necessitates codification. You have to write the rules down. You have to bake them into the system so they can be repeated at a massive scale.
Yeah.
And once a rule is codified, you reach the critical turning point: reduced discretion.
Discretion meaning the ability of an individual to say, I know the rule says X, but in this specific situation, I'm going to do Y.
Correct. Codification kills discretion. And when you reduce discretion, you automatically relocate practical authority.
Let's look at the case studies the sources provide, because they really illustrate this perfectly. They start with the printing press. Now, usually when we talk about the printing press on this show, we talk about it as this great liberator, right?
Oh, yeah, the democratization of knowledge.
Exactly. But look at it through the lens of authority. Before the press, who held the formal authority over truth?
The church and the crown.
Right. If you wanted to know what the Bible said, you asked a priest. You couldn't read the Latin, and you certainly didn't own a copy. The authority was centralized in a person.
The priest was basically the infrastructure.
In a way, yes. But then the printing press expands access. Suddenly, texts are everywhere. People learn to read. Now, the king is still the king. The pope is still the pope. The actual org chart of Europe didn't change overnight.
Right.
But the practical authority, the power to interpret the text, to decide what it meant, migrated to the distributed readers.
So the structure remained exactly the same, but the power just quietly left the building.
Exactly. The infrastructure, the press decentralized interpretation, that was a shift away from the center. But the next example the sources give shows a shift toward the center, the Industrial Revolution.
This is the shift from the craftsman to the factory worker.
Yeah, think about a master carpenter in the 1700s. He has incredibly high discretion. He picks up a piece of wood, he looks at the grain, feels the weight, and decides exactly how to cut it. The authority is entirely in his hands. He is the master of the process.
Then you bring in the industrial machine.
Right. The machine standardizes the motion. The quote-unquote best way to cut the wood is built right into the gears of the lathe. The worker just becomes an operator. They feed the wood in, they pull the lever. They cannot decide to cut against the grain. The discretion is totally gone.
And where did the authority go?
It went into machine design.
Yeah.
And who controls the design? The manager, the engineer. Standardization reduced the worker's discretion while simultaneously increasing managerial oversight. The worker lost the ability to decide how to work.
That feels like the exact blueprint for the modern corporation.
It really does. Which brings us to the third case study, and this one hits really close to home for anyone working in a big company today. ERP systems, enterprise resource planning.
Ah, yes. The SAPs and Oracles of the world.
We usually think of these as just boring accounting tools.
Sure.
But the source argues they are actually political systems.
Oh, they are absolutely political systems.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the transition from paper ledgers to software. In the paper days, let's say you needed to approve a vendor payment. Your limit as a manager was $5,000, but the invoice came in at $5,005.
I'd probably just sign it. Maybe I'd write a little note in the margin explaining why, or I'd, walk over to accounting and say, hey, let this slide, it's urgent.
Right. You used human discretion. You navigated the ambiguity of the situation. But in an ERP system, the logic is strictly codified. If your limit is $5,000 and you try to enter 5,001 cent,
the field turns red. The button is grayed out.
Yes, the button is grayed out. That is the defining experience of modern bureaucracy. And I want you to really focus on that moment. When you are staring at that gray button, entirely unable to proceed, who made the decision to stop you?
It wasn't me. And it wasn't my boss, because even she can't ungray the button without, submitting a ticket to IT. It was, I guess, whoever set up the system 5 years ago.
Exactly. That is where the authority settled. In the configuration, in the code, the infrastructure is now doing the managing. The decision was made years ago by a consultant you never even met, based on a rule that might not even apply to your current situation anymore. But because it is codified, it is absolute.
That is such a chilling thought. We were basically being managed by the ghosts of decisions past.
We really are.
And this brings us to the psychology of framing. Because if this is happening, if authority is actively moving into the wires, why do we keep pretending it isn't? Why do we cling so hard to the idea that we are still in charge?
Because the alternative is terrifying. How an organization frames a new technology basically dictates how it survives it. And usually we frame things to protect our egos.
The sources bring up the newspaper industry facing the internet. This is a classic tragedy in business.
It is. When the internet arrived, Most newspaper executives looked at it and framed it as an existential threat.
Which, to be fair, it kind of turned out to be.
Well, it was a threat to their business model, yes, but not necessarily to their core function as news gatherers. But because they framed it as a threat, their psychological response was defensive consolidation.
They circled the wagons.
They tried to protect their old authority. They built paywalls around the exact same PDF versions of the physical paper. They tried to preserve the printing press model in a totally digital world. They used the new technology just to build a moat around the old castle.
Instead of asking, what can we do now that we couldn't do before?
Right. That would be framing it as an opportunity. If you frame it as an opportunity, you get expansionary risk-taking. You reinvent the format. You invent the news feed or the live blog or the interactive data visualization. But you can only do that if you are willing to let go of the old way of exercising authority.
So, bringing this back to AI when we say it's just a tool, that is us doing the exact same thing the newspaper barons did.
Yes. The tool mindset is a psychological defense mechanism. It is a security blanket. If I say, I am the general and AI is just my scout, I feel safe. I feel like the hierarchy is perfectly intact.
But if I admit it's infrastructure,
Then you have to admit that the scout is actually determining the route of the whole army. You have to admit that the system is shaping the outcome far more than you are. And for a leader whose entire identity is built on being the decider, that is a massive identity crisis. It hides the fact that the tool is quietly taking over the steering wheel.
okay, so we have the history of authority migration, and we have the psychology of why we tend to ignore it. Now, I want to get into the mechanics. How does this actually happen day to day? The sources outline the 5 forces of AI adoption.
These are 5 structural forces that get unleashed the moment you integrate AI into an organization. And remember, you don't choose to adopt these forces. They are packaged with the technology.
Let's run through them. Force number 1 is what we've been hinting at all along. Authority migration.
Right. This is the authority drift. Power moves upstream. The decision isn't made at the end of the meeting anymore. It's made during the data selection and model training months prior. The actual point of decision moves away from the context of the problem.
Force number 2, incentive compression.
This one is subtle but very dangerous. AI systems are optimization engines. They want to maximize a specific variable, usually speed, cost, or engagement. When you optimize for one thing, you inevitably compress everything else.
Give us a concrete example of that.
Well, think about hiring. If you use an AI to screen resumes and you optimize it for efficiency and past success, the AI will compress other values like diversity or non-traditional potential. It doesn't know how to value those abstract things unless you explicitly force it to, so it just squeezes them out of the process.
Force number 3 is proxy expansion. This is all about metrics.
We need to do a whole segment on this in a minute, but briefly, we stop looking at the real world and start looking at the dashboard. The map replaces the territory.
Force number 4, friction collapse.
The total elimination of delays and disagreements.
Which, I mean, that sounds great. I'd love to eliminate delays in my workday.
It sounds great until you realize that friction is literally the only thing that slows you down enough to think. We'll get to that.
And finally, force number 5, dissent narrowing.
It becomes harder and harder to disagree with the machine. When the computer, backed by 10 petabytes of data, says the answer is X, and you just have a gut feeling it's Y, do you really have the political capital to raise your hand in a meeting?
Probably not. I don't want to be the guy arguing with the supercomputer.
Exactly. So the range of acceptable debate naturally narrows. The Overton window of the organization shrinks to fit the algorithm's output.
I want to zoom in on force number 2 and the economics behind it. The economics of judgment versus prediction. Because at the end of the day, businesses are rational. They don't just do things because they're trendy. They do them because of the bottom line.
This is the engine driving the whole train. We have to look at the massive cost asymmetry between humans and machines.
Break that down for us.
Think about human judgment. Real, deep, deliberative thinking. It is inherently expensive. You have to pay smart people high salaries. It is slow. Humans need to read, process, discuss, sleep, drink coffee.
And we are really inconsistent. We have good days and bad days.
Right, we have high error variance. If you give the exact same file to 3 different managers, you might get 3 entirely different decisions. Now look at prediction, which is essentially what AI provides. It takes data and predicts an outcome. It is ridiculously cheap, it is incredibly fast, and it is relentlessly consistent.
So from a purely economic standpoint, the CFO is looking at this saying, why am I paying for expensive, slow, inconsistent judgment when I can just buy cheap, fast, consistent prediction.
Organizations are rational entities. As the cost of prediction drops towards zero, institutions will naturally prefer prediction over judgment. Even if human judgment is quote-unquote better in a nuanced way, prediction is infinitely scalable.
It's like the fast food principle.
Okay.
A home-cooked meal by a chef might be objectively better, but McDonald's is fast, cheap, and I know exactly what I'm getting every single time I order.
And that leads directly to the tension between substitution and augmentation. This is the big debate right now. Everyone loves to say AI will augment humans, not replace them.
That's the PR line. Co-pilot, not autopilot. Human in the loop.
Right. Augmentation means using the tool to expand what a human can see. It helps you make a better judgment. But the economic gravity always pulls towards substitution. Substitution means replacing expensive human thought entirely with cheap automation.
Can you give an example of how that slide actually happens in practice?
Look at loan approvals. That's the classic example in the sources. Augmentation would be the AI analyzes the finances and gives the loan officer a risk score, and the officer uses that score to have a deeper, more informed conversation with the applicant. They use the tool to see things they might have missed.
That sounds ideal.
But that's expensive. You still have to pay the loan officer to sit there and have the conversation. Substitution is the AI approves or denies the loan in 50 milliseconds. No conversation, no nuance, just a cold decision.
And the bank saves money on the officer's salary.
And they process 10 times as many loans in a fraction of the time. So the economic incentive is always to remove the human from the loop, not to keep them in it.
But there's a huge cost to that.
Right.
We lose something fundamental.
We lose epistemic growth. That's a fancy academic term for learning. If you stop judging and just start validating predictions, you literally stop learning how the world works. The loan officer stops understanding why businesses fail or succeed. They just know what the computer score is.
That connects directly to the trap of metrics, or force number 3, proxy expansion. I feel like this is something everyone deals with, AI or not, but AI just seems to put it on steroids.
Absolutely. It starts with a very simple distinction. The difference between an indicator and a target.
Okay, unpack that.
An indicator is a metric that represents reality. It's a proxy. For example, calls answered in a call center might be a proxy for customer service. If you answer more calls, presumably you are helping more people.
Right, it's a signal.
But over time, the metric becomes the reality. It becomes the target. This is the proxy substitution effect. The source traces the exact chain. Measurement enables visibility. Visibility enables comparison. Comparison enables reward and penalty. And once you attach rewards to a metric,
People will absolutely kill to hit that metric, even if it destroys the actual mission of the company.
exactly. So in the call center, if I'm rewarded purely for calls answered, I'm going to rush you off the phone. I'm going to hang up on complex problems so I can quickly take 3 easy ones. The metric is green. Look, I answered 100 calls today, but the actual customer service is completely dead.
This is Goodhart's law, right? When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
It is, and AI exacerbates this because AI only understands the metric. It doesn't understand the spirit of the law, only the letter. It is the ultimate gamer of the system. If you tell an AI to maximize engagement on a social media platform, it doesn't care if that engagement comes from joy or absolute rage. It just sees the number go up.
So structurally, who holds the power then? It's not the manager of the call center, and it's certainly not the employee.
It's the data interpreters. Authority shifts to the people who control the dashboard. If you define the metric, you control the organization's behavior. The dashboard isn't just a passive report, it's a command and control center.
I want to pause and ask the listener right now, think about your own job. Is there a metric you're chasing that has stopped representing success and just started defining it? Are you chasing the number or the result?
It's a critical question to ask yourself, because when you chase the number, you usually try to remove absolutely anything that slows you down. Which brings us to the death of friction.
Force number 4. The source calls this optimization as a threat. Now, this is controversial. I've spent my entire career in business being told that optimization is the holy grail. Lean, agile, Six Sigma, efficiency, eliminate all waste.
We are totally obsessed with it. We treat friction as the enemy. If there is a pause, a delay, redundancy, we try to kill it. But the source argues that friction actually equals learning.
How so? Give me the defense of friction.
Think about when you actually learn something new. Is it when everything goes perfectly, when the process is completely smooth?
No, it's when things break. When I screw up. When I have a heated fight with a colleague about the right way to do something.
Exactly. Friction, the delays, the disagreements, the failures, the anomalies, Those are the exact moments that force you to stop, engage your brain, and analyze reality. That is epistemic growth. You have to stop and ask, why didn't that work?
So if I remove all the delays and all the disagreements,
You enter friction compression, you maximize performance and speed, but you eliminate the space for learning entirely. The cycle is brutal. Optimization narrows variance. Reduced variance reduces experimentation. Less experimentation means less feedback from reality.
and the organization just becomes dumber over time. It's moving very fast, but it's basically lobotomized itself.
It becomes incredibly efficient at doing the wrong thing. It locks the organization into what the philosopher Thomas Kuhn called normal science.
Explain that concept for us.
Normal science is just optimizing the status quo.
Yeah.
You're refining the existing model. You're basically making the candle burn slightly brighter. AI is the ultimate engine of normal science. It is fantastic at optimizing within known parameters.
But what about when the world changes? What about when the electric light bulb gets invented?
That's a paradigm shift. And that's the core problem. AI makes it much harder to see anomalies, those weird edge cases that actually prove the old model is wrong.
Because the AI just treats them as an error.
It treats them as data noise. It smooths them out. A human might look at an anomaly and say, wait, that's weird. Why did that happen? Maybe our whole strategy is wrong. The optimized system just discards it entirely to keep the average high.
So we literally become blind to the signals that the world is changing around us. We're driving 100 miles an hour with a painted-over windshield, just trusting the GPS completely.
That is a terrifyingly accurate image. And this leads us directly to the question of who is actually watching the road.
Section 7, the illusion of oversight. Because surely there are humans checking this stuff, right? We have oversight. We have managers. We have compliance officers. We haven't fired everyone yet.
We haven't fired them, but have we hollowed them out? The source asks a brilliant question. Are you still the decision maker? Formal authority, your titles, your reporting lines, that often stays perfectly intact. You're still the VP of sales. You still physically sign the document. But substantive authority has fully migrated to the algorithm. The source describes this as the oversight illusion. Humans review the output, sure, but the field of decisions has been massively narrowed upstream by the model.
So by the time it gets to my desk, the AI has already thrown out 90% of the options.
Yes, and the options that remain are simply the ones the model prefers. So your review process becomes a validation ritual rather than actual decision-making. You are just rubber stamping the machine's logic.
And there's a velocity issue here too, right?
Yeah.
I can't oversee 10,000 decisions a day.
This is the loop of acceleration. As systems get faster and faster, humans have less and less time to review each case. If you have to review 100 loan applications an hour just to keep up with the queue, you cannot possibly critique the AI's logic on each one. You physically do not have the time to load the context into your brain.
So you just click approve. You trust the machine because you have literally no other choice.
And as reliance on the system increases, override frequency declines. Eventually, dissent becomes procedurally impossible. You don't have the data to argue. The machine has 1 million data points. You have a hunch. Who wins that argument in a boardroom?
The machine wins. There's a powerful quote here from the sources. Who controls the information controls the decision.
This is informational authority. Authority isn't just about the final signature. It's about who framed the problem in the first place. If the AI selects the data, weights the variables, and presents the summary, the AI has completely framed the problem. The signature at the very end is just a formality. It's a ceremony.
So we arrive at the core concept of this entire deep dive, Section 8, where decisions settle. This feels like the philosophical heart of the whole argument.
It is. We tend to think authority is this fluid thing that exists in the moment of choice, like a spark. But the research says authority settles. It hardens.
Define settlement for us.
Settlement is the moment where ambiguity becomes structured power. It's the moment where the debate stops and the action begins. Governance begins where authority stops being negotiable.
And historically, that settlement happened in the boardroom or the manager's office. We argued, we looked at the data, and the boss said, all right, we're doing plan A. That was the settlement.
Right. It happened in real time at the end of the process. It was visible. You could point to the actual person who did it.
But now,
the shift is upstream. In an AI world, decision settlement moves away from the boardroom and into the server room. It settles in the model configuration, the constraint design, and the data selection.
So the decision was actually made 6 months ago when the data scientists decided which variables to include in the model.
Yes. When they decided that, say, zip code was a valid variable for credit risk, they settled the decision for thousands of future applicants. By the time the file reaches your desk, the decision is already a ghost. It happened in the past. You're just haunting the process.
Wow. You're just haunting the process. That is haunting. It makes you feel like an observer in your own job. So, if prediction takes over routine and settlement moves completely upstream, what is left for us? What remains human?
The sources are very clear on this. We aren't obsolete, but our role fundamentally shifts. What remains is irreducible human judgment.
What does that actually include? If the machine does all the math, what do I do?
Value prioritization, deciding what we actually care about. Is it more important to be profitable or fair? Is it more important to be fast or safe? The machine cannot answer that. It can only optimize for the one you pick. It includes ethical trade-offs.
And handling the weird stuff.
Yes, handling exceptions, the anomalies we talked about. But there's one more really uncomfortable role for the human here. Responsibility absorption.
Taking the blame.
The human shield function. Ouch. Think about it. An algorithm cannot be fired. An algorithm cannot go to jail. An algorithm certainly cannot feel shame. Organizations still desperately need a human to stand at the podium when things go wrong and say, I am responsible. The legal and social structures require a human face to punish.
So we basically become the chief apology officers while the machines make the actual calls.
That is the dystopian view, yes. The more optimistic view is that we become the guardians of values. We set the constraints that the machines operate within. We build the guardrails. But that brings us to the critical question the source poses at the end.
Which is?
Does meaningful human oversight even exist if the human lacks the cognitive capacity to disagree with the machine?
If I can't understand why the AI made the decision and I can't calculate it myself, I'm not really overseeing it. I'm just watching it.
You are a spectator with a title. And that is the danger zone. That is where we lose control not just of the process, but of the entire purpose of our organizations.
This has been intense. I feel like I need to go look at every piece of software on my computer and ask it, who sent you?
It's a healthy paranoia to have. We need to stop looking at screens as windows and start realizing they are walls that guide us.
Let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by dismantling the comforting lie of AI as just a tool.
And replaced it with the reality of AI as infrastructure. It's the road, not the car.
We've seen how authority naturally follows the infrastructure. From the printing press decentralizing interpretation, to the factory centralizing execution, to the ERP system strictly codifying logic.
And now AI, constantly drifting authority upstream into the model design.
We've seen how we trick ourselves with the tool mindset to feel safe, while the five forces authority drift, incentive compression, proxy expansion, friction collapse, and dissent, narrowing quietly rewire our entire organizations.
We discussed the brutal economics of it all. Why cheap prediction drives us towards substitution, replacing human thought with automated guessing, even if it actually makes us dumber in the long run.
We talked about how metrics can hijack the mission, turning us into gamers rather than workers.
And how killing friction essentially kills learning, making our organizations fast but incredibly fragile.
And finally, that decisions settle upstream, deep in the code, long before we ever see them.
It's a complete restructuring of how we work. It's not just a new tool, it's a new constitution.
You know, it's very important to state, as the source material explicitly does, that this is analysis, not advocacy.
Correct. We aren't saying smash the computers. We aren't saying AI is evil. We are saying look at the invisible lines. This is about disciplined perception. You cannot manage what you do not see. If you think it's just a hammer, you are going to get hit by the house it builds.
I want to leave our listeners with a final provocative thought drawn from the research. We call it the settlement question.
It's something to ask yourself tomorrow morning. Look at your next big decision, the next file you open, the next approval you click. Ask yourself, did you actually make that decision? Or did you just validate a structure that was already settled by the system, the data, and the constraints defined long before the file ever reached your desk?
Are you the player, or are you just keeping score?
That is the question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Ooh.
Look for the invisible governance in your week. We'll see you next time.